So, Cliff, Gritt, what did you think?
I think this is a really clever film. I do think it takes a little bit of patience and a bit of an investment in it. But I was always interested in it from the start. From the opening scene, there's two people having a conversation about one about their artwork and one about the musical that they're in, and they're creative people, and so it did get my interest from the beginning. Um, for quite a long time in this film, and I'm still not sure. There's a lot of ambiguity in this film. I think there's a lot of things of which I'm really unsure, but I think I couldn't tell if this film was, if the artists talking in this film were sincere or whether it was all kind of bullshit, and I think this is where I think the film was clever, because I think you don't really know. It's like the play that they're doing in New York, the play you see in New York, I can't decide whether it's just ridiculous, pretentious kind of rubbish, or whether it's, really cutting edge avant-garde art. And I like that fact that I wasn't sure. And I think all the way through the film, you're never quite sure if this is being critical of that type of artwork, or whether it's actually sympathetic to it. And I think it kind of treads a really interesting balance so that you're not really sure. I'll be really interested to hear what you think about that. I like the way it's made. I mean, at points it is almost like a documentary, and at the end I noticed that there were several people playing themselves in it. And I think, just the theatre company in New York is a real theatre company, and that is the guy who runs it. So that I like that, and it makes you think of like Nomadland, which I really liked that in Nomadland, that it had lots of people who were playing themselves, but it was fictional as well. And so I like the way it was made. I really liked the kind of background music because the background music created a real air of unease through the film. I mean, often it sometimes it really felt like it was going to turn into a horror film at points, because it was just you were left feeling uneasy. I mean, it's a very different film, but I thought of Uncut Gems, of how you just feel anxious all through that film. The film that is a really interesting experience of making you feel uneasy through the whole film. And this did the same as well. There's a general sense of unease, and I wasn't sure whether it was going to turn into a horror film or something. I really like the ambiguity around her character. Do I like her or not? I don't know. I mean, she does some really, she's dishonest and deceit. She deceives people and she steals things, and so she's not an unambiguously kind of decent person, but at the same time, there's an authenticity to her as an artist that I did appreciate, and I did kind of, so I never knew whether I liked her through the film or not, and I really like that. And interestingly, today I've just watched Lost Daughter on Netflix, and obviously it's a very different film, but I think in some ways the main character in that is, again, there's a big ambiguity. You don't know whether you're supposed to like her or not. And so it's really interesting having seen both those films this weekend, because I think they make quite an interesting pair, actually, in terms of the skill of making a film that can really pull that off, where you do feel ambiguity towards the person. It's not one or the other. As I say, I do feel that there's an authenticity to her, because you definitely get the feeling that she is genuinely trying to do something different. You know, she's trying to not just conform to, like when she goes to the couple's house with the kids, and there's, you know, they're watching a stupid dating program on TV, and you know, they're talking about how useful the shopping mall is. She's presenting it as something that's, you know, really sad, and they're saying, well, it's really useful to be able to drive in there. You know, I think I like that kind of contrast, because you do kind of feel that she's onto something. You know, I think kind of creatively and politically, I'm really with her. You know, and it's so easy to start compromising. And I thought it was interesting. And so at the end, I kind of feel that the last, is it half an hour when she goes off into the woods? I really like that segment, because although not very much happens, I think things do become a little bit ambiguous, less ambiguous. I think we do realize that she is authentic, and she's having an authentic experience. And I did, she was reading a book on one time about sex psychology, and so I just Googled that, because I've never heard of sex psychology, and it's about taking on the earth as a lover, a kind of radical environmental practice and activism, and I think that's actually really interesting, and that does give a clue to the fact that something really is authentic is happening, because she's actually having a really good time, and she's, you know, she's by herself, and it is very, you know, you do wonder if she's going mad. You know, there's still some ambiguity, because it's like, is she going completely nuts, like dressing up as a witch and kind of going on top of the roof and doing these strange rituals? But there's really, I found that quite authentic, and her process of kind of transformation and transcending that, the material world almost, in nature. I really liked it, and I really, you know, the fact that she got to make her ritual in the end, I think that maybe that gives me a bit of a clue that we are meant to take some of that stuff around the Arts Council application and the theatre that we see. There is perhaps a slight, maybe criticism would be too strong, but it's like, in order for her to realize her creative potential and really make her work, make the work that she wanted to make, she didn't have to fit it into some grand project that that she needed financing for, and needed to shoehorn it into kind of conditions of grant applications, that actually she could go and do it completely by herself. And obviously that's only one aspect of the creative process, because ultimately I do believe that, you know, when we make artwork, it's really a beautiful thing to share it with others. But the most important part of the process, at least initially, is making the work for myself, is kind of the process that I go through. I think in any artwork that I try and make, it is about having an experience myself. It's not about trying to produce something that will go in a gallery or hang nicely on a wall, or, you know, be shown in a cinema. Or it's about having that experience. And so I've really identified with her process, and what I think the film was trying to say, that that actually you don't need the art world to make art. So that's it.
Very, very interesting. Yeah. So I liked it very much. I really enjoyed the film. There is very early on in that first scene, she is talking to her friend, and her friend describes a project she's got, and she says, just make sure it doesn't end up more self-centered than political. Yeah. And so I started to think, okay, is this sort of preempting its own criticism? Is it self-aware? Is it a kind of metafictional universe that I'm inhabiting here? But very quickly, I realized I wasn't bothered by that question much, or really intrigued by it, because I was, from very early on, completely carried away by the naturalism of the performances. And when you talk about certain ambiguities in the film, I agree, they are there. I didn't necessarily find them productive or even intentional. And I'll explain what I mean. Everyone talks kind of borderline rubbish, this sort of silly art projects and cod philosophy and new agey DIY spiritualism. And as you say, there is often, it's accompanied by this like really portentous music, which I assumed was for kind of comic effect, as though it was trying to send up this kind of attitude and lifestyle in a fairly gentle but straightforward way. The problem, it's a strange way of saying it, but the problem is her performance is so good that at no point did I find her funny. At no point did I laugh at her. You know, so when there was this, what I can only assume was like an intentional mismatch between the seriousness by which these ideas presented and the kind of silly, portentous music that's supposed to create this disjunct that I assume is meant to be amusing. It fell flat because, as I say, I wasn't laughing at her. I believed in her. And I think it's not a showy performance. It's not a kind of Gina Rowlands performance, but I do think it's an exceptional one. I think she was absolutely brilliant. And her ideas, while they might be kind of silly, as you say, or sometimes kind of ill thought out and a bit kind of wonky, there is heart there. You know, this is a film about a woman who is trying to work out who she is, what she wants, and how she can say it. And I got the sense that at some point very early in her life, she decided that performance art was going to help her do this. And performance art, or the milieu in which she surrounded herself and the way she was practicing that art for most of the film, it wasn't working for her, but she didn't know how to do anything else. And so she just kept trying and kept trying. And it was, you know, it ends up being a film about a woman whose life has become completely unmanageable. And she is trying to get it back on track. And there are some very, very believable and like uncomfortable scenes where, you know, where she starts working with those refugees within the theatre, and you know it's a bad idea, and you know that she knows it's a bad idea. And then when she's on the phone to Lars and she's like, look, please let me have this, you know, and it just felt so believable to me, you know, where you dig yourself a hole, and instead of just putting your hands up, you just keep digging, you know. It was just, and so I just sympathized with her completely. And so, but then later on, you have this scene where she sets fire to the hay bales, right? And in that moment, I sort of got a sense of what this film might have been like if this was a lesser performance, because this kind of on the nose scene of her kind of losing it and spiraling out of control seemed more in keeping with sort of Mickey taking portentousness of earlier scenes. But again, because I believed her, it didn't feel sort of silly and outrageous. It felt almost logical. And so I wrote down a couple of times that I don't think the film knows what it wants, because it was almost like the performance was too good for the film and undermined the film's ambition, or at least as it seemed to me the film's ambition was this kind of gentle, I'm kind of mocking you, but it was like someone mocking someone who actually they're friends, you know, like I'm taking the mickey out of you, but you know we like each other, that kind of tone. But it didn't work because she was so convincing, you know, and so it ended up being her film. And I completely agree with you about that last section when she was in the woods and you finally get a sense of something authentic, and you realize that the problem with her is exactly as you say, that she is forced to talk about her art, and she's not very good at talking about her art because she just falls into this art speak nonsense that makes it sound ridiculous. And, you know, as you say, trying to squash it into these grant applications and all that stuff. And it just shows very effectively demonstrates, without having to say it, the violence done to authentic art by talking about it, you know, and trying to make it fit into that landscape. And so you really got a sense that she was doing something meaningful out there in the woods. It was clearly, you know, it really felt meaningful to her. And I thought the film captured really well the sort of restless, uncertain, slightly mad, alone, but very engaged life of the artist. You know, there are scenes where she's just out making notes and she's observing things, and you know, and that felt really believable. I was really there with her in her aloneness, but there was a richness to it, you know. And so even in her most desperate moments, she seemed like an artist to me, and I believed her to be an artist. She just hadn't worked out how or what she needed to say. So I found it an utterly convincing film, and it's interesting to hear you. I didn't realize that there were people who were playing themselves, and so perhaps I'm being a bit hard on the film's ambiguities. Perhaps it really does know what it's doing, and perhaps these ambiguities are intentional, and I've kind of missed the point. I just felt like it's almost like the film had been designed to be one thing, and then Bridget Larson came along and just completely turned it into something else because her performance was so good, you know, and it left the film kind of, I just didn't understand what the film was trying to do. And I felt like it didn't know either, because as you say, some of this stuff, you know, are you taking the mickey? Well, if so, why are you presenting such a sensitive portrait? Because that means I sympathize with her, which means she's no longer the butt of the joke, which means there isn't a joke. So what's this all about, you know? So I found it a really interesting film. Her performance, I think, is really terrific. I think it's really standout performance. And I was thoroughly engaged, really entertained all the way through. Really impressive film.
Yeah, that is so interesting, because I definitely have the feeling that it's the tone of the film is everything is intentional. So I think the filmmaker has decided that it's going to take a performance like Bridget Larson to be able to do what she wants to do. So I slightly disagree with you in the sense that I think if it hadn't have been Bridget Larson, she would have had to find someone else who could do exactly what Bridget did, because I agree, it is a fantastic performance. You know, she's really balancing that thing between, is she mad or is she, you know, a genius? Is she really, you know, and really trying to live a true and honest life, you know, in terms of her being an artist. And so I never saw it as kind of laughing at that world in the way that, what's that film we were talking about the other day, The Square?
Yeah.
Is it The Square? The Square for me is laughing at performance art, whereas I never felt this was laughing at it. In some ways, I think, especially once you get to the end and you can kind of see her experience, her transcendental experience almost at the end as kind of something really authentic, you can then go back and you don't have to be critical of kind of how confused she was trying to fit into that world where everyone's talking about their work and filling in forms for grants. And, you know, it's just, there's nothing in this film that says that the other artists and the actors weren't authentic as well, but it's how everything becomes distorted in that world, you know, including her, not just in art, but in life when she goes and stays with that couple. So I kind of found it very, very deliberate.
I guess I was just.
Do you think I kind of felt that the refugee experience, that despite everything that was wrong with it, that actually she was helping those guys did have a kind of creative experience around it, and they did experience something when they were doing like the workshop in the theatre. I did feel that there was some benefit to that it wasn't.
Maybe, but I think but that's not what motivated her.
No, that's true.
And
but
so
that's the ambiguity, isn't it?
Yeah. So when that woman said, you know, we do need to make sure that this is about them as well. Oh, yeah, it is about them. In that moment, no, it's not, you know, she's being dishonest there. But I found that, you know, very, very believable. And I think that was actually very sharp, because that's a really interesting distinction, isn't it? You know, who is this art for? Is it just for you? And I suppose it goes back to that point, you know, is this just self-centered? But what did you make then? Because it was really the music more than anything that led me to think, like, this film doesn't know what it wants. that really portentous music while they're talking about this stuff. It just seems so, it was such a, you know, what is the effect there? Surely it's trying to make me say, oh, this is amusing, you're taking the mickey out of this.
It's really funny what a different reaction we've had to the music in this, because to be honest, I can't really remember it now. It's not like I can remember the tunes in it. There was some, because I think there was two types of music in this. There was some genuine kind of classical music. We often had bits of classical music that provided a bit of background. But then there was also just, you know, music which were kind of sound effects, which were just kind of, which felt like it was something uneasy was going to happen. I never ever felt, it's interesting how you see things differently, isn't it?
Yeah.
I never ever felt the music was in any way trying to suggest comedy or humor.
Okay. All right.
I do feel like I would like to watch it again for that.
Yeah, at least some of those things, because, you know, it was always when they're having conversations about, you know, they're having that conversation about Judith and stealing the sperm, and she's like, oh wow, how profound, you know, and it's like really not profound, the conversations they're having. You've got this eerie kind of music, you know, it's like, surely this is for comical effect. But as I say, it wasn't funny because I was just so completely bought into her, you know, her performance was so real that I just couldn't laugh at her, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I never, you know, as I said earlier, I never really knew whether it was criticizing that world or not. Yeah. Whereas it feels like you decided quite early on that they were just talking rubbish. I was kind of,
it really is a very fine line, isn't it?
I kind of stayed on the border of it. I felt that I was being kept on the border of not quite knowing. I mean, I do think, having, you know, made live artwork myself, you know, the term performance artist is really problematic, because I could say I'm a performance artist, but it kind of gives the, I hate the word performance, because I'm not performing if I make work. And I think her type of work wasn't, you know, she had to call herself a performance artist. And I love that bit where she's chatting with the guy and he's in the gym and he says, what do you do? And she says, I'm a performance artist. And she's really authentic, and she's really, you know, he doesn't have a clue what she's talking about. But I did feel that there was something about performance art here that actually, you know, she is a performance artist, but actually her best work was when she was by herself.
Yeah.
And so there's something really interesting there about what performance art is, because for me, performance art is about the experience for the artist and the experience for the viewer. So I kind of feel at the end was a really optimistic ending, and she was going to get the bus back into town, and she was going to have a new way of expressing herself as an artist, that her work was going to make a lot more sense. She was going to know who she was. She found herself.
Maybe. Yeah, that's a nice reading of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad we both liked it. It does. Yeah. I do really feel like watching this again, because, yeah, as you say, I think in the first 20 minutes, half an hour, I wasn't sure whether I was enjoying it. Which is why I said that it, you know, I think I felt I needed to have a bit of patience. But now we're talking about it, and by the end of the film, and definitely now we're talking about it, I think this is a really great film. Really, really good.
Well, yeah, certainly a very interesting film, and I would definitely look out for the filmmaker. It would be really interesting to kind of see their future work and see whether other works help me to resolve this uncertainty about whether actually there's kind of a disjunct here between how good the performance was and the filmmaker's intentions. But yeah.
This is her first film, isn't it?
I didn't know. Okay.
It said that on Mubi, I'm sure. It said debut film.
Well, it's very impressive as a debut.
Really impressive, isn't it? Good.
Yeah.
So what are we doing next?
Next up is a film called Friends and Strangers, Australian movie by Matthew Vaughn.
Excellent. Looking forward to it.